to help it grow, help them grow, that the impact on the human body, as Minister Walker will tell you better than I can ever do, literally is deadly with respect. And we've known and seen examples of it in our region, in our country, and we have now to mount a systematic campaign both on this and climate. And the truth is we need our young people under 30, locally, regionally, and internationally to embrace these issues, because this is going to determine the kind of world that you're going to live in. And we need to make sure that it is one that still gives you the chances to have a future of hope. My friends, if we contextualize the fact that just under 5 million people have died from this pandemic, and that is in 20 months, against the fact that the antimicrobial resistance issues show us that it is just under 1 million people a year that already die from this, we begin to understand that we are literally at risk of reversing a century of medical progress and making visits to the dentist or having babies literally difficult and challenging events if infections occur. The next meeting was with the president of Costa Rica, with whom Barbados shares much again. Costa Rica's approach to development, with the balanced approach with respect to social justice, highly developed social sectors, while at the same time pushing economic activity in tourism and elsewhere. Their emphasis on language development, as we would want to do. There is much literally to work together, but the biggest issue is on our approach to debt, particularly the need to get the global community to accept that much of the COVID-related debt is strangling out development in our countries, and that we are literally crowding it to continue the development trajectory, particularly with the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we don't find ways of refinancing the COVID-related debt into long-term instruments, what we're going to do is literally prejudice the opportunity for development in today's world. And we use the example all of the time. I'm sure you've heard me say that Britain, after the war, was able to take the debt incurred during the World War, and literally refinance it into long-term instruments, into perpetuity bonds, while giving themselves the opportunity to borrow to be able to deal with the issue of rebuilding Britain. So debt borrowed during the war was put one side into long-term instruments to borrow to rebuild because of the war. We are no different. We are facing literally one of the worst events since World War II, and we therefore believe, as developing countries and middle-income countries, that we have to work together in order to be able to create that case. And I'll come to that further with respect to some of the other meetings we held during the week. That was Monday. With respect to Tuesday, we met, we went to the General Assembly, the opening of the General Assembly, and of course, we would have been there to participate in much of the major speeches in the morning, starting with the UN Secretary General's speech, which, for those of you who are interested, I am telling you, it is compulsory reading, because it sets out almost to the T what needs to happen, not just globally, regionally, and within development in countries. And he identified 6 clear bridges that are affecting, 6 clear divisions that are affecting the world, for which we must build bridges. The majority of that day would have therefore been spent in the General Assembly debate with a number of larger countries, but we also met with the Director General of the World Trade Organization on Monday evening, Ngozi Iweala, who is a deep friend of Barbados's. She served on the CARICOM Commission on Economy at our recommendation, and she has literally been working with our representatives in Geneva to be able to see how best we can create a better framework for trade policy, and as a result, domestic productive policy for small island states. Senator Walcott is in fact going to be the vice chair of the WTO's ministerial meeting in November, early December. The reality is that we have not had a major set of success in the WTO since the Doha round collapsed. And the bottom line is that we need to be there on a range of issues, from fisheries to trade and health, which is huge now with the pandemic, to issues such as the dispute settlement mechanism that remains literally ineffective because of the position taken by many advanced countries with respect to its constitution. We then went and we met also on Tuesday. I participated with Professor Jeffrey Sachs with the Center for Sustainable Development in a conversation on development options for small island developing states such as ourselves, and to build a platform for how best we can continue to build the alliances and pursue the development agenda and ensure that it remains central. There's a lot of fancy language, meaning what? That we want to make sure that we can continue to provide free education in Barbados from primary, pre-primary to tertiary, that we want to continue to be able to provide the access to healthcare that we have, particularly now, that we want to ensure that people have their best opportunities for sports and arts and community development, that we want to make sure that there's a deal for the elderly in our country, that we want to make sure that there is also a way of changing how we deliver that care at the community level for those who are most vulnerable. And then that we want to make sure that the digital divide that has been thrust upon us largely because of the the extent to which we've been forced into online education, that does not divide the people, the children of the world, by the haves and the have-nots. And to that extent, we're very, very clear. And the next day, in fact, I also met with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank to ensure that we can work with them, not only on our current portfolio of loans, but most importantly with Professor Sachs and hopefully major regional development banks like the Inter-American Development Bank, like the Caribbean Development Bank, to work with the 5 large tech companies of the world to see how we can produce an affordable tablet that will make it possible. Because once you're talking about online devices, what are children very often going to do? They're going to drop it, they're going to spill something on it, they have to be rugged, and they have to be affordable. And when you examine, as and I should have gone back, on Sunday, Professor Sachs and I, both as members of the UN Broadband Commission, addressed this issue of digital divide, and he was able to point out that the top 5 companies in the world who are technology companies, Apple, Facebook, Google, etc., they have a market capitalization of $9.3 trillion. And it is against that backdrop we believe that we can find common ground with them, not only to make these devices accessible and affordable, but also to ensure that the content on them does it. And we know it in the context because in Barbados, traditionally, we've had a textbook loan scheme that our children pay for. We feel that we need to have a seamless transition into that. But forget only Barbados alone. There are countries in our hemisphere, in our world, where people can't get access either to device or the internet. And that is what we're trying to bridge. On Tuesday evening, we had dinner meeting with the president of Ghana, who, as you know, is a deep and close friend of Barbados. And we were able to address a number of our issues in the international community on which we reflect and need solidarity, and also to be updated on a number of other issues economically. The major discussions as well, we thanked him for the continued support with respect to the Ghanaian nurses in Barbados, and we are very grateful, particularly during the course of this pandemic. We noted as well that we, as I indicated before I left Barbados, that we do have a request for additional nurses, and we expect that that request will be processed in the upcoming weeks. We have now to work out the details of exactly how many and to recognize exactly where we will deploy them. I'm happy at the same time to report that while some of the Cuban nurses left, 48 of them left, we got another 20 nurses to come to replace them. The deficit that is there is being taken up by the Barbados Defense Force and others in the swabbing areas, and therefore we are still in a position to appropriately manage our output with respect to the nurses. The Wednesday, as I said, we met with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. And then Wednesday afternoon, we participated in the AOSIS, which is an acronym for the Alliance of Small Island States. There are 43 of us across the global community. It is currently being chaired by the Prime Minister of Antigua, and Barbados has been one of the key members advocating, as we know, on issues of climate, on issues of debt, and on issues of the need for vulnerability to be a key criteria in determining who can access concessional funds. And why? Because at the end of the day, if you ask and say that I can only borrow from you at low interest rates because of my per capita income and my GDP, the bottom line is that that is historic, because that is the data that we used from a year or two ago. And I've said in simple terms, to the point where Minister Walcott laughs at me now, that taking that approach is like taking my blood pressure from 2 years ago to determine if I'm going to get a stroke today. It is highly, highly inappropriate and irrelevant to the truth of what we're trying to achieve. And what matters more is how vulnerable are we to Hurricane Elsa? How vulnerable are we to an ashfall? Because those are the things that have impacted negatively on our GDP and require us to spend more money than we would otherwise have to spend. And hence, Ambassador Jackman and others, Ambassador Blackman, as well in Geneva, as well as the domestic economic team, in particular with Professor Prasad and Dr. Greenwich, we have been arguing for vulnerability as a key criteria. And let me put it in context. Professor Prasad's father worked at the Commonwealth Secretariat. And in 1989, he started the argument on the whole issue of vulnerability. Owen Arthur led issues on small states financing and did a lot of advocacy on the issue of vulnerability. So this is an issue that has affected our countries for the last 3 decades. It is one of the reasons why Barbados and Bahamas were also not able to borrow from the World Bank, in spite of the fact that we are still exhibiting vulnerabilities on so many issues. As you would recall, when I chaired CARICOM last year, I would have mounted a serious effort for advocacy to allow us to be able to do so. And in truth and in fact, earlier this year, the World Bank would have then allowed Barbados and Bahamas to be able to access concessional funding again as a result of the pandemic. And we argue we need it as well as a result of the climate crisis. So that was the AOSIS meeting. And we had a number of other bilaterals. The president of Guyana and the vice president of Guyana, we were able to meet and share on fundamental issues that are affecting us both within CARICOM, but also to be able to coordinate and collaborate internationally, as we did also with the minister from Grenada, who is one of the key ministers leading on climate, as we go into the pre-COP meetings in Milan next week, as well as Glasgow at the beginning of November. On Wednesday evening, we had a very, very touching and emotional engagement with Barbadian nurses and the Barbadian diaspora right here at the mission. It was a hybrid meeting, obviously because of COVID, and therefore many of you may have seen it on YouTube already. I think that there may have been a report in yesterday's paper about aspects of it. I confess to being lost for words at one point when I was touched with the extent to which Barbadians are so committed to even want to come back and help at this very challenging time for our country. And many of these nurses would have served in Barbados already. Some of them have come here, they've gotten their PhDs in nursing. They have literally put forward a framework that will allow us, we believe, to establish a Bajan medical brigade. And you know, we have a saying, one blows kill old cow. Well, by persons volunteering for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, the combined efforts will have the same impact of being able to assist us in a way that the Cuban Medical Brigade and the Ghanaian nurses have been able to help us ease the pressure on the system, not just generally, but to go forward as well, looking not just at nurses, but also at other medical skills. There were doctors here, as well. There were also lab technicians who want to come, phlebotomists. There were hospital administrators. And I must tell you, it is one of the best meetings that I've had in the diaspora since coming to this office. And we were touched also by the testimony of persons who had COVID here. I was able also yesterday to meet with a Barbadian who is treasurer, a major treasurer of the Transport Workers Union that is responsible for the transit workers and transport workers in buses, in rail, across New York City. And he was able to say that he lost 200 of his members. The stories that he told us were heart-wrenching. And I hope Mr. Ellis will be able to interview him, Earl Phillips, to be able to ensure that we can share with Barbadians really and truly what some of our compatriots have been undergoing in this part of the world. On Thursday, we met with the Secretary General of the United Nations, and that was an excellent meeting. We look forward to welcoming him in Barbados next weekend. As you know, on the 4th of October, formally, we've had a number of UNCTAD fora, but on the 4th of October to the 7th of October, Barbados becomes the smallest country in the world ever to host a major United Nations global meeting, and certainly in the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. UNCTAD was literally established to be able to give developing countries a voice on trade and development issues. We undertook the responsibility of wanting to host it. Why? Because as small states, we need fiscal space and we need policy space. And many of you may ask, well, why are we doing all of these things? Because the policies that we can execute in Bridgetown are in some ways determined by what we are permitted to do so globally. And we know that this is an effort that requires us to be focused as we go forward. We were also able to meet on Friday. I, of course, had to prepare for my address to the United Nations, and many of you may have seen it. And as you know, and as you may have known me for a while, we need to move the needle. And to simply come to this country year after year, in this forum year after year, and say the same thing while not seeing progress is something that Barbados cannot in any way tolerate. We set a very high standard, both with Sir Grantley Adams before independence and with Errol Walton Barrow at independence, with respect to the positions that we've taken with respect to our foreign policy and the extent to which we engage with the rest of the world. We believe that the world is at a fork, and just because we are small doesn't mean that we can't do things. Last night we had dinner with who came into the New York, the new Prime Minister of Bahamas, and we had an excellent meeting with him, and we'll be looking forward to working very closely, as we've always done, with the people and government of the Bahamas. Ironically, he has Bajan linkages, and therefore that makes it even more special. I could go on and on, but I'll stop. Yesterday morning, I also had meetings with the President of the World Bank, David Malpass, and the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Christina Georgieva, in my capacity as Chair of the Development Committee of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And today we have a few more meetings that I'll go to. My friends, this has been a packed week, but it is a week we believe will add value to Barbados's options and to Barbados's capacity to meander and negotiate in this very difficult world with respect to climate, with respect to the pandemic, with respect to debt, with respect to vulnerability generally, and with respect to investment. Yesterday evening, we were able to meet with a group, one of the major health groups in New York State, Northwell Health Group, which owns one of the hospitals, North Shore Hospital in Long Island. North Shore Hospital has been responsible for training many of the leading surgeons and consultants in Barbados over the years. The relationship between our country and that particular hospital was very strong at one time in the past. It has, for just over a decade or so, it was allowed to drop. And the truth is that we are in a position where we want to re-engage in a very deliberate way. We were able to view the emergency standalone center that they have in downtown New York, which is extremely impressive. They are already in discussions with the University of the West Indies on other matters pertaining to medical education and medicine, and they are now in discussions with us. They've agreed to dispatch a team to Barbados next Wednesday of 4 doctors and 4 nurses, to help us also with the review of our framework as we manage the surge in COVID. And they are also in discussions with us for the provision of telemedicine, because one of the ways that we bridge the gap with respect to available services will be with respect to the opportunities for telemedicine. Minister Walker can tell you much better. There are also leaders in some forms of robotic surgery and in cardiology in the Northeastern Quadrant. And we feel that we can rekindle the relationship in a way that will benefit us at this difficult time in our country's history. I want, before I finish, also to address the issue of the whole question of vaccines. I did it Wednesday night, but you know, sometimes you have to repeat yourself in this world. The leader of the opposition and the leader of the Democratic Labour Party, we have, over the course of COVID, ensured that we've tried to reach out and to keep these issues above partisan consideration. It will continue to be the approach of my government. But at the same time, when we have persons doubting the process of vaccinations at the time when we know that we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated, we are doing a disservice not only to our country, but more importantly to people's lives in our country. The last death that we had last night was an elderly woman, again, unvaccinated, I'm told. The bottom line is, my friends, this is nothing to play with. New York City is moving around everybody, and their positivity rate is only 3%. The same emergency center we went to yesterday was responsible for vaccinations for almost everybody in Lower Manhattan, going right back up to Midtown. And believe you me, impressive, but no different from what we are doing at home. It is against that backdrop that I have to ask us, please, to let us focus on those issues that are going to help us get out of this. When I heard the leader of the Democratic Labour Party seeking to find something to throw mud at, I said to myself, does the leader recognize that she is functioning as the leader of a main political party that has at some time to ask itself how it is helping the country get through this difficult moment and how it is helping the country save lives? And if its only way is to try to throw mud in the hope that the mud will stick, well, then I say to her, my dear, you are going down the wrong road. I know what it is to have led an opposition party, perhaps longer than most in our country. And I know what it is to determine what battles are worthy of opposition and what battles require the country to come together. With respect to this issue, I repeat, as I said on Wednesday night already, there is no contract with radical investments. We know at the time that the country early in the year was trying to get vaccines, and I told the country over and over and over, it was like the wild, wild west out there, just as it was with the PPE equipment a year ago. In every instance where we have sought to deal with people, we have put the public interest at the center of it. We indicated that with Radical, should they be in a position to deliver the 300,000 vaccines, we would pay for them on delivery. Similarly, we had an engagement with another Barbadian world-class medical company whose weekly suppliers were prepared to be able to get for us. And those were the ones we paid some money towards. And when we realized that the vaccines were not coming from them in a hurry and that we were getting vaccines from elsewhere, on behalf of the government, I instructed the Director of Finance to ask back for our money, all of which came back since months ago. But with radical investments, not a single cent. I note that the concerns of Mr. Pisa were also met with a very firm and strong statement from the COVID relief charity, which quite frankly also had no dealings with this. And they too have indicated that all of the funds donated will be subject to an audit, as is their practice. I go further. The vaccine fund that the government of Barbados set up earlier this year, to which many Barbadians, individuals, companies, and persons who have come to call Barbados home, even if only for a few months of the year, donated, that we have not paid a red cent, a blue cent, a black cent, or a silver cent to anyone. And that to that extent, I want to tell you that I've asked the Director of Finance to prepare for laying in Parliament on Tuesday morning a full statement of that vaccine fund, which this morning he already indicated to me that as of today is September 24th or 25th? As of yesterday, September 24th, the National Vaccination Fund collected the sum of $11,339,866.33, of which $7.8 million was transferred to the Consolidated Fund on March 26, 2021. As of March 24th, 2021, $500,000 was spent on the purchase of vaccines. There were only 2 purchases of vaccines because of $300,000 for Pfizer and $200,000 for Chinese Sinopharm vaccine, and that the majority of money has not been spent, and largely because we have been lucky, but we're not past the worst. You heard the Minister of Health yesterday talk about the need for boosters that have to come, and therefore we have to ensure that we continue the ready supply and vaccination of our persons. But I understand what the allegation is about, so let us not get tired. I understand that this is about the fact that the principal of radical is Mr. Mark Maloney, and that you believe that by calling his name, that you can taint this government and taint the process of vaccine delivery and distribution in our country. And let me be very, very clear about this. In November 2017, at the Barbados Chamber of Commerce, in the full glare of the country, I said then that I do not like how Mr. Maloney was negotiating contracts, or the government was negotiating contracts with Mr. Maloney, but that I admired his ambition, and that at some point we would expect that we would have to deal with him. The government of Barbados cannot blackball Barbadian companies of any type, color, or stripe, and we will deal with them. And believe you me, I will not, as leader of this government, be intimidated into things that will cause the country to suffer simply because of a person who has in the past been someone who we've had to speak very strongly to. The mere fact that we have negotiated the kind of deal that we have tells you all that you need to know, not a single cent. And for that comment about implied contractual terms, my dear, I have been an attorney general too for 5 years. And I know I can tell you, as a basic first-year law student can too, there's something in a contract is only formed when you have offer, acceptance, and consideration. Show me the consideration. And the bottom line is that this is a red herring intended to distract at the very time that we want Barbadians to increase their vaccination levels. I was telling you about New York, yes, just now, because the 3% positivity rate in New York is largely, when we asked them yesterday, what did they tell us? Because of the high level of vaccinated person. Now, this morning, I've already had a meeting with the Cabinet Subcommittee on COVID, which is the second one we've had for the week, even here. And tomorrow evening, we'll have another one once we return. So that I'm asking our country, please, and I'm asking Verla as well, please, Ms. DePisa, please, let us focus on saving lives and ensuring that those who are unvaccinated do not become a victim. I give you the assurance that you can meet with the Director of Finance and ask him any question you want with respect to this vaccination fund and with respect to the issue of any obligations to Radical. A Barbadian firm that needed to be anchored in order to secure, as all others, we had from India, from Canada, from the United States of America, we had from China, we had others also offering along the way. And we said, look, and I remember a press briefing at the lower court when I said we're going to use multiple sources because we do not know which one will arrive first. So that it is easy to talk now when Barbados has literally 49% of our population. 49%, almost 1 in every 2 Barbadians have had at least one vaccination. And in the course of the last week, I'm happy to report, and we still have today, because the week doesn't finish until today ends, but we are already overall 10,000 vaccines or more, but of the first dose, only about less over 6,000, and we don't know what will happen today. As a result, we will move the curfew from 6 o'clock on Sundays to 9 o'clock, because we also know that the public issue, where is it that the virus is causing us problems? It is not in our public spaces. It is in the homes, regrettably. And it is in the communities around the homes. And last night when we met with the Prime Minister of Bahamas, and when we discussed with the Prime Minister of Denmark, that has been their experiences too. Now we take it from different points. And the bottom line is that where we need to message and where we need to get the word around, call your neighbor and say, darling, if you've got these children coming in here all the time, remember to tell them, keep the mask on. If you don't have masks, I'm going to ask that masks be distributed in every part of the country, working with the churches, working with civil groups, because we need to make sure that it is in that space. Now, I also want us to put everything in context. Barbados has had in the last 20 months only 7,200 cases roughly of COVID. What does that mean? That more than 270,000 Barbadians have not had it. No, that does not mean that it is not serious. It is serious and challenging because we're really playing COVID roulette. We don't know who is going to be attacked with COVID. Just as when you put bullets in a chamber with Russian roulette, you put one bullet and you spin, you don't know who or what is going to happen to you when that trigger is pulled. And that can literally be the case with respect to COVID. We do not know who. And one of the things that bothers me in the epidemiological reports that are coming now is that even with the children who are getting sick, that the majority of them are children under 12. That's in the household. Children under 12 don't walk the road. The majority of them are in the household. So I really want us to apply our hearts to wisdom, as I have said over and over. We will get through this. I'm exceedingly confident. And I'm exceedingly confident that Barbadians are now responding in a very positive way and recognizing that the way to be able to get back to the removal of these restrictions and the removal of the things that have made life so difficult, like lack of jobs and underemployment and lack of contracts being serviced or being available, is for as many Barbadians to be protected at the individual level, such that this virus, which has now become endemic, will be with us for probably ever, if not a very, very long time, that we treat to it just like we treat the dengue or the flu or chicken pox, that we don't want it, for sure. None of us want dengue or chicken pox or the flu. And for most people, in excess of what, 90–95% of people, there will be no hospitalization and there will be no death. That is where we want COVID to go in Barbados. But the government could only want it and put things in place. It will only happen when the majority, not everybody, but the majority of Barbadians can get us to that point. And I'm satisfied now we're in a better position than 90% of the countries in the world. 90% of the countries in the world, but we can do better. I want to do like Denmark. I want to do like Iceland, and wanting to aspire to that is not a crime, Mr. Pisa. And if getting to that point means that we have to engage people legitimately, and this is the point, it's how you negotiate contracts, not who you do business with alone. And to that extent, in every instance, we have put the public interest, we've put College of Negotiators in place with a range of contracts, but that is not for today. We'll talk about that another time. So I'll pause at this stage. Jerome, there isn't anything else, is there, Francois? And I'll ask any questions available if the media are there to ask any questions. I hope I can see, because the camera is far away. This is not like at home where we have a fancy setup. So bear with me if I can't see who is asking the questions. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Yes, how are you doing? Basically, on the issue of radical investments, since you broached that this morning.
On the issue
are you hearing me?
Sorry, which investments?
Are you
radical. Okay.
Yes, on the issue.
You have to speak a little loud because I'm far from the speaker, so that's why.
Okay, I'm going to make the projector as loud as possible. Is this better?
God bless you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Now, on the issue of radical investment, there seems to be one discrepancy that is a major talking point on this entire issue. While you have cleared up the fact that government has not expended.
With all due respect, I'm trying to hear, but persons are also talking. Go ahead.
Yes, while you have cleared up the fact that government has not expended any money whatsoever as it relates to this private deal, and that basically government did have knowledge that it was taking place on the behalf of the people of Barbados. You have the Minister of Health who is reported saying that he knew nothing of this company. Could you square that up for me, please, Madam President?
With all due respect, my brother, you have been in so many press conferences with us. Every time the issue of vaccines came, who spoke to it? Me as Prime Minister, not the Minister of Health. And I told you all early on that I had taken responsibility for this issue, along with the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs, along with Mrs. Juanita Thornton-Powlett, along with the Permanent Secretary, Alice Jordan, in the Prime Minister's office. There is no mystery about that. And we did that to allow the Minister of Health to manage the day-to-day aspects of COVID treatment, while as Minister of Finance, as well as Prime Minister, I managed the engagement, because the other thing was that when we were dealing with India, who would be able to deal with the Prime Minister of India's office? When we were dealing with the White House, who would be able to deal with the White House? When we met with Pfizer, who had to deal with Pfizer? It was me and the Attorney General at a very high level, and that never went anywhere, by the way, because there were a number of meetings that you had meetings trying to get. Johnson and company, Minister Walker did it on my behalf. When we were dealing with China, it was me and the Minister of Foreign Affairs that dealt with it. So I'm not sure, this obsession with trying to find some mud, you understand? But take care, the mud don't boomerang. Any other questions?
I was giving someone else a chance, but I don't see. I would ask another question until.
No problem, my brother.
Until someone else jumps in. On the issue of mandatory vaccines, do you think that we are approaching the time where we must have that conversation? Government, as you would have indicated earlier, government must govern at this time, as we see some private entities testing the limits in their own companies, and basically implementing what some might determine as coercion. Even though at the social partnership level, the agreement was in place that we would let the education process play out first. Could you respond to that quickly, please, Madam
Thank you. Let's contextualize it. As we indicated from the very beginning, we would prefer, and I personally do not like the notion of mandatory vaccines. I don't. And that we have said we will work hard to get as many Barbadians educated, sensitized. And I said that I would be the chief one out there trying to do it, even though I'm not supporting mandatory vaccines. What we've always said, and at the same time I said this to you, go back to the press briefing again, because remember, I don't forget what I say. Go back to the press briefings again, and you will see me make the point that we also will make tests freely available to people, because we know that there are some people who will never be able to be vaccinated because of their medical condition and because of their philosophical position. We are reaching a point where we have to sit with the private sector and with the public sector and with the labor movement to determine how best to use the combined approach of vaccinations and testing to ensure that those who have been vaccinated are not unfortunately restricted or removed from being able to pursue their living. And at the same time, those who are not vaccinated are not excluded from participation in a society that governs an island, that comes across an island that is only 166 square miles. We do not have the size to admit of serious divisions in our country, because the divisions will not end with the COVID pandemic. They will endure for generations. This is my judgment as someone who has served as Attorney General. This is my judgment as someone who has served as Minister of Education and Culture. This is my judgment as someone who has served as Prime Minister for the last 3 years. But it is also the judgment of my cabinet individually and the collective expertise there too. It is against that backdrop that we anticipate that we will have a framework that meets the needs of all Barbadians to ensure that they can be safe. Because what is the thing I ask everybody to do all the time? Ask yourself the questions when you deconstruct and reconstruct. What is the public purpose we're trying to save in terms of this? We want people to be safe. And we want people to go into the employment safe, to be serviced by employees safe, and to be able to go around in their leisure time activities safely. And to that extent, what is it that measures safety? We believe that vaccinations, while not 100% foolproof, have the kind of probability that allows us to protect persons from death and from serious hospitalization. And that while you will get breakthrough cases occasionally, the breakthrough cases thus far have not led to any form of death at all. By the same, in Barbados, by the same token, we recognize that just because a person is not vaccinated does not mean that they're positive. And the best measurement of that is in fact with the test. And to that extent, therefore, testing must continue with the exception of persons traveling overseas. We've said testing will remain freely available in Barbados. We had the virologist from the Pan American Health Organization come in this week. Minister of Health has told me there's a report waiting for myself and Minister Walker as chair of the COVID subcommittee when we return tomorrow. We will review that this week and we will see how best, in conjunction with the labor movement and the private sector, that we can put a framework in place that allows us to meet the public purpose without creating a public mischief. And that is how we should govern in these matters. So I look forward to having these discussions, but let me say, all of this is against the backdrop of what I just told you, that this week we already had an additional almost just over 6,000, and I expect today the numbers will increase again because Bajans are getting the message. And we've said that let's work together so that incrementally we continue to remove the restrictions of the curfew such that by the end of November, when persons could especially be partially or fully vaccinated in larger numbers, they're closer to the 70% that we want, that we can have going to the celebration of independence and Christmas and 2022 with people being more assured of getting their jobs back, being able to work full hours if they have jobs but are underemployed, being able to have contracts fulfilled again because economic activity is moving at a different level. We have to be able to reclaim our future, as I said, without compromising the health of the majority of Barbadians. And we are committed to that. But we do recognize that, as I said, 1 in every 2 Barbadians almost. In the case of adults, it is over 1 in 2. In the case of the overall population, in spite of the fact that from babies to 12-year-olds cannot get it, and they constitute at least 50,000 of the 280-odd thousand people in our country. So you're talking about an eligible population of only 230,000. Go and look at the dashboard, and you see over 130,000 Barbadians have already had a dose. So against that backdrop, the conversation about mandatory with the kind of acid and division that has taken place in other countries is not relevant in our own country. And that's why I say I am so proud, believe you me, to lead a country where the level of social capital and trust is such that we can have the conversations and people can respond in their best interest. One of the things that does concern me, and I'm being straight with you, is that if you continue to put negative in front of people every day, you make them, you don't press them. And that's why I open bills once a month. Because no bills ain't gonna hurt my head the rest of the month. And who ain't know that yet, learn it. Because every time you get a bill a day today, and a bill next week, and a bill the week after, and a bill, your whole day mess up. Or when you get bad news day after day after day, your whole day mess up. And what we are trying to do, I think we should change the structure of our dashboard. I think that that daily thing in people's heads is a down presser, when in truth and in fact, we need to be able to recognize and celebrate the fact of how far we've come. Of course, the deaths are hurtful, and hurtful because I get them in the middle of the night, and sometimes I can't sleep when I get them. And we're going to work literally day and night to get as many people protected and to ensure that we can get away from this pandemic of the unvaccinated. And we're making sure that we have, and I want to make this point, Dr. Ford said, and I want to salute them for their efforts on Wednesday with that wonderful broadcast where the staff themselves were able to share with Barbados the extent to which they're being required to go beyond the call of duty in our defense. But as we do that, we are telling you, if you feel sick, if you have sore throat, if you have a rash, if you have diarrhea, if you have loss of taste, don't dally. And let me put it to you as I put it to Dr. Ford and to Mr. Ellis. People who tell me that I'm waiting to have the vaccine, people who tell me I'm waiting to get tested, people who tell me I am feeling right by waiting to go to the doctor. I ask you each time, if you're not ready to be tested, and you're not ready to be vaccinated, and you're not ready to go to the doctor, are you ready to die? And I don't mean to put it so bluntly, but that is effectively what you're doing with COVID roulette. So I think we're in a good position. I think we need to be in a far better position, however. And to get and bridge that divide, we need the remaining, not even 100,000, we need the remaining 50,000, as I said. Well, we're close to that now, 42, 43,000 will help us to get there. And ironically, PAHO believes that we have been even more conservative with respect to the kinds of regime that we want to put in place as Sante and others settle for schools than they are recommending. So that these are the conversations that we need to have now with the country, and I look forward to them continuing so that this will get us back to a position where I don't want to hear about 20,000 tourism workers can't find work and full-time work anymore. I don't want to hear about the fact, as I had to share, I forgot to mention that I also participated in a Women's Leader Forum with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the President of Tanzania, the President of the European Union, the Prime Minister of Estonia, and the Prime Minister of Moldova, and the President of the General Assembly. And one of the things I pointed out is that up until 2018, female unemployment was larger than male unemployment in Barbados. Between 2018 and the beginning of the pandemic, early on in the pandemic, female unemployment was significantly less than male unemployment. And it is largely because of women participating in the services sector, I believe, and the provision of goods. Since the pandemic, female unemployment has risen way above male unemployment again, because they have been on the front line of the burden of this adjustment. So believe you me, we need to get back to a point where we can allow persons to recognize how they can live safely and work safely, because we are seeing other things beginning to affect this society beyond COVID. And I've said from day one, Barbados is not a one-issue country, and the government doesn't have only one issue to deal with. Any more questions?
Yes, again, I would implore my other media colleagues to jump in at any time, but just one more question again from me as it relates to the radical investment issue. Could you give me an idea, Madam Prime Minister, as this has been asked by both the leader of the opposition and the president of the Democratic Labour Party, what sum was government intending to pay for those 300,000 vaccines had they landed successfully in Barbados, permitting that with the fact that AstraZeneca would have already indicated?
No problem. The same sum of money that we were paying to the other local medical supplier, which is 24 US, and we made it clear then, as I did earlier in the year, if you go back, that the prices that we were being asked, like with PPE, like with ventilators, bore no relationship to what other people were able to access as major countries. from directly, and that what we were not prepared to do is to stand on the sidelines and see the people of Barbados suffer without access to vaccines. It is because of that we said to radical investments, when you land them, we will pay for them, and we'll pay in full one time. But what we were not doing was that until, especially given the experience we had, and we were beginning to feel with the other company, we were not prepared to put out the money. And because I knew that these kind of questions would come to, believe you me, I said not a cent until we get them. So let us be clear. I also want to say that, and I mean this sincerely, this press conference is not just about radical. And this country is not at this stage where controversy and red herrings matter most. The country is trying to save its future, just like the world is trying to save its future. And I want us, please, to focus and apply our energies in ways that are constructive. I will give you chapter and verse, and perhaps, you know, I better understand now why the president of the Democratic Labour Party has had 2 contests in the last 2 years. And I want to say to her, it is not mine to give gratuitous advice, but I will share my experiences with you. You have to be able to focus on the larger issues that are affecting our country rather than being just the purveyor of rumor and innuendo and trying to hope that something will stick. If there is a Cahill issue in my government, by all means go after it. But believe you me, this is not a Cahill issue. And I can give other chapters and verse of other issues that we went after, but we didn't go after those issues alone. We dealt substantively with pensions. We dealt with the preparation such that within 1 week of being sworn in as Prime Minister and the Attorney General as Attorney General, we were able to meet the world and to say what we were doing with our debt and what we were doing with the IMF program in order to avoid a $100 million payment that would have left us with less than 3 weeks of reserves. Our reserves today stand at in excess of 35 weeks at 2.92 billion roughly. And I'm asking and appealing not for my sake, not even for the sake of the legacy of El Bar, but for the sake of our country. This country is best when we have strong debate and strong commentary. But when we seek to elevate things that really can't withstand muster, then we are in trouble. And to talk about a solution, IBC, Barbados has been promoting international business companies for 4 decades or more. And that's what we've gone to the OECD to fight for, to protect. And there is nothing illegal about people doing the tax planning through the establishment of companies, whether in Barbados or St. Lucia or other countries in the region that have an international business network, Cayman, BVI, we can go on and on. So I beg you, please, let us focus on getting as many Bajans. And I want to, in this forum, say to the Democratic Labour Party that please help us in getting out there people in your party, in your constituencies, as in our constituencies, Bajans in our churches, in our church, sporting groups, cultural groups. Let us get as many Bajans vaccinated so that the notion of people dying from this, even though we have among the lowest death rate in the world, ironically, our death rate is even half of what Denmark's was. So let us close the gap. Thank you. Let us close the gap. Yesterday I talked about minding the gap. Let us close the gap on vaccinations. Thank you.
Prime Minister Mottley. Prime Minister Mottley. Shane Jones from CBC. During the course of your presentation, you made mention of the Sunday curfew time moving from 6 to 9. I know we are due some new directives. Are we going to see any more changes, or can you tell us anything more about when those new directives will come out?
Well, the directive finishes tonight, and in fact, there'll be a new directive as of tonight, as well as a new proclamation from Her Excellency, which will be issued, and that has to be dealt within 30 days, I believe, in Parliament of Public Health Management, and the capacity to be able to reduce the numbers as we go through our day. That is the advice from the public health people, but at the same time, we have to balance it with what we need to be able to keep people employed, because it's no sense trying to keep people safe and people dying from lack of food or from other things that have been occasioned by the restricted movement. It's a balance. Any other questions?
Final question from me, Madam Prime Minister. In terms of the UNGA summit, you mentioned quite a few meetings.
It's not, I mean the General Assembly.
General Assembly, yes, sorry, my apologies.
That's all right.
Could you give the country some idea that this was much more than just talk shop? Could you give me some of the idea of any concrete things that we can look forward to?
I think you heard my speech. I think you heard my speech yesterday, and if you didn't, I'd suggest that you listen to it. It was very clear that the countries of the world have to move the needle. We were able to see some limited progress. The United States of America's president acknowledged that the climate crisis was real, as he has all the time, and that the target set for $100 billion a year to be able to be used with climate financing, there was a gap. There still is a gap, but the United States has increased their amount by a further 11.8 billion, I think, Francois, and that was achieved. China also agreed for the first time to no new coal plants outside of China. We know that we need to go even further because we need to literally stop the extent to which fossil fuels are burning, as I said in my speech yesterday. So we've had some limited progress, but the truth is we need to close the gap, because if we don't, countries like ours, small island developing states, have said consistently that we need 1.5 degrees to survive. What does that mean? That the world has already seen an increase in temperatures, regrettably, to 1.2 degrees. Any of us who watch Sky Television on cable will recognize that they were running a dashboard periodically for some time that tells us that in 12 years' time, this is 2021, by 2033, I will, how old be? 67, about to draw a pension, and hopefully having a peaceful life. But I don't want to be in a life where we have to look about moving from Barbados or moving from coastal areas, because the world would have reached 1.5 degrees by then. The IPCC report has issued a code red for humanity. What does that mean? Absolute danger, because on current trajectory, with the nationally determined contributions, in other words, what countries say they will do between now and 2050, we are likely to have an increase in temperatures of 2.7 degrees, which means absolute ruination for humanity. And this is not esoteric, and that's why I keep telling you, apply and remember the floods we've been having, the destruction of our coral reefs. When we were children, we used to see cobblers and sea eggs all about the place. We don't see them in the same way now. The extent to which we are seeing across the world. Look how Hurricane Dorian sit on top of Bahamas for 2 days. 2 days. And the Prime Minister of the Bahamas has indicated to us last night that they are still very much their major priority. Their major priority still is the rebuilding and reconstruction efforts in Abaco and Grand Bahama. So these things are very, very real, and I hope that I really would like Barbadian young children like Maria, who I interviewed last year, who's 11, 12 years old, right back up to those at 30. I want you to become the global leaders on this issue, because it is your world. And as the president of Costa Rica pointed out to all of us, who are the people under 30 in this room? And that's why the UN Secretary General's call for an office for young people to be represented in almost every major issue. And we're going to do it at home again and continue to do it, is because it is your world you're defending against the pandemic, against AMR, against climate crisis, against the fact that the world is now seeing coups and military incursions again in a way that we thought was behind us. Any more questions? If none, I really want to thank you. This is a first for us. We would normally do this debriefing, as I said, on arrival in Barbados, but because we are subjected to the quarantine issues, and because I'm not sure how we will feel after that, and jet lag and the testing, I said, you know what? Apply our hearts to wisdom, and let's do it this morning and speak to you. And I really thank you for the opportunity of coming. And engaging me on domestic issues more than the other issues here, but I have every confidence that our continued engagement on all of these issues will be critical. As I said, COP26 is coming up. I'd like to challenge the media to work with us to bring greater awareness to average Barbadians as to what the climate crisis will mean to them at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, from access to water right back through to protection from flooding. Thank you very much, and God bless everyone.